Mia Thompson and Lily Carter were ordinary teenage girls with ordinary lives until one cold Friday evening in Liverpool. They never came home. What followed would uncover a hidden network of predators, a city's darkest secrets, and a gang that thrived in the shadows for years. This is the story of the Shadow Gang, and the girls who vanished into silence. It was a cold, misty Friday evening in Liverpool. The kind of night where the streets glimmered under streetlights, but felt empty and quiet. Two teenage girls, best friends since primary school, left their homes in the early evening, planning to meet at the city's shopping center. They were ordinary teenagers, full of laughter, schoolwork, and weekend plans, but that night would change everything. Their families believed it would be just another typical evening, perhaps a few hours of shopping, a quick bite to eat, and then home. But hours passed, and the girls never returned. At first, the families assumed the girls had stayed over at a friend's house or lost track of time. Phone calls went unanswered, and messages were left with friends who could not provide any answers. By midnight, unease had replaced casual concern. The police were contacted, and an official missing person report was filed. The initial searches covered nearby streets, parks, and local cafes, places the girls were known to frequent, but there was no sign of them. Their backpacks, phones, and personal belongings were left behind, suggesting they had not planned to be gone long. By early morning, the city was beginning to wake up to a quiet panic. Rumors started to circulate among neighbors and friends. Had the girls run away, or was something far more sinister at play? The police expanded their search to a wider area, checking bus stops, train stations, and surrounding residential areas. Every CCTV camera in the vicinity was reviewed, but nothing concrete appeared at first. There were glimpses of shadows on the footage, figures moving quickly, but the images were unclear and inconclusive. As daylight broke, a sense of dread filled the neighborhood. Posters were printed, friends and family scoured the streets, and local media began reporting the story. The disappearance of the girls was not just a family tragedy, it became a community concern. Parents kept their children indoors, while teenagers whispered theories and fears in schools. Every day that passed without answers heightened the tension. For the police, the case was puzzling. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere, no messages demanding money, and no obvious reasons for the girls to leave on their own. They seemed to vanish without a trace. Officers began piecing together a timeline from the few available witnesses, including shop attendants and passers-by. But every clue led to more questions rather than answers. It was as if the girls had stepped into thin air, leaving only a trail of uncertainty and fear behind. By the end of the first week, the case had attracted national attention. News outlets portrayed the girls as innocent victims of something dark lurking beneath the city's surface. Yet even as investigators promised answers, the families had no choice but to wait, hoping for any sign of their daughters. Liverpool itself felt smaller, quieter, and more uncertain. In that silence, the city began to realize that these were not random disappearances. They were the first signs of a threat that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again. As the investigation into the disappearance of the two teenage girls progressed, police began to notice patterns that had been overlooked in the initial chaos. Reviewing hours of CCTV footage from the shopping center, streets, and bus stops, investigators spotted something unsettling. In several clips, the girls appeared to be followed, not by one person, but by three figures who kept their distance yet mirrored every movement. They were hooded, their faces hidden, but their presence was deliberate and controlled. It was not a chance coincidence. Someone had been watching the girls carefully, waiting for the right moment. What puzzled the police most was the precision of the following. The hooded figures moved with a coordinated rhythm, avoiding detection while making sure they never lost sight of their targets. They lingered near bus stops and street corners, sometimes blending into crowds, sometimes disappearing into narrow alleyways, only to reappear moments later. It was as if the girls were being shadowed by someone who had studied the city and its movements in detail. Investigators began cross-referencing the footage with other recent missing person reports in Liverpool. Slowly, a disturbing connection emerged. Several young girls had vanished over the past 2 years, all in similar circumstances: late evenings, public spaces, and no clear reason for leaving their homes. And in almost every case, CCTV revealed the same hooded figures lurking nearby, always just out of focus, always careful to leave no traces. The pattern suggested something far more organized than a random criminal act. As the weeks went on, police widened their search beyond the usual areas. Surveillance footage from car parks, libraries, and even local bus routes revealed fleeting images of the same figures. Neighbors reported seeing suspicious individuals loitering near schools or following teenagers home. But by the time anyone attempted to intervene, the figures had vanished. They were ghosts, operating in the city as if it were a private playground. The realization began to sink in slowly. This was not the work of isolated individuals. There was an organized group operating within Liverpool, specifically targeting vulnerable teenage girls. The sheer planning involved, the monitoring of routines, the knowledge of escape routes, and the careful avoidance of detection pointed to a level of sophistication that shocked the community. Parents became anxious, teenagers began to alter their routines, and local authorities issued warnings about walking alone at night. For the families of the missing girls, the discovery of the shadowy followers was devastating. It confirmed their worst fears. Their children were not lost because of a simple mistake or a teenage whim. They were being hunted. Every detail in the footage told a silent story of surveillance, manipulation, and control. Investigators began to suspect that these figures had been watching not just for weeks, but possibly months, studying habits, learning patterns, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By the end of the chapter of initial findings, the investigators had a clear understanding. This was a network, hidden group operating quietly in Liverpool, leaving no fingerprints and no direct trace. The real challenge lay ahead: identifying these figures, understanding their methods, and stopping them before more girls vanished would demand every ounce of skill, patience, and courage from law enforcement. What had begun as a simple missing person case was evolving into a chilling investigation into an organized, calculating force lurking in the city's shadows. With the realization that the disappearances were linked, investigators began looking beyond the streets and shopping centers of Liverpool, searching for hidden places where the missing girls might have been taken. They examined abandoned buildings, derelict warehouses, and forgotten industrial sites, but most offered little evidence. Then a tip from a concerned local led police to the city's old railway tunnels, a network long abandoned and mostly sealed off. The tunnels stretched for miles beneath the city, twisting and turning in ways that few people could navigate without a guide. They had been closed to the public for decades, yet somehow someone had found a way in, and perhaps used them for far darker purposes. Search teams descended into the tunnels, their flashlights cutting through thick shadows and dust. The air was damp, cold, and heavy, carrying an eerie silence that made every sound echo unnaturally. At first, they found only the expected debris of urban decay: rusted rails, broken signs, and discarded packaging from years gone by. But then, deeper inside, the first unsettling discoveries appeared. Burnt clothing and fragments of personal items were scattered in hidden corners. Mobile phones, some smashed or charred, were left behind as if deliberately destroyed to prevent tracing. There were remnants of backpacks and shoes, ordinary belongings that had once been in the hands of ordinary girls. As officers moved further, they noticed markings on the tunnel walls, symbols, arrows, and dates scratched into the concrete. Investigators began to piece together that the tunnels were more than just hiding places. They were a controlled network used by someone who knew the layout intimately. The markings appeared to function as a guide, mapping routes, exits, and hidden rooms, and suggesting that the perpetrators had planned their operations with careful attention. The discoveries inside the tunnels sent a wave of fear through the investigation team. It became clear that these were not random disappearances. For months, perhaps even years, someone had been using the tunnels to hide victims, removing them from public view and making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to track their movements. Every piece of evidence, the clothing, the phones, the faint traces of personal effects, was a stark reminder of the girls who had vanished and the unknown horrors they might have endured. The tunnels also hinted at a larger, more organized operation. The items found were not haphazardly left. Some areas had what appeared to be temporary living spaces, with blankets and makeshift bedding. Others showed signs of attempts to erase footprints, with burnt areas and broken items strategically placed. It was as if the perpetrators had rehearsed every step, knowing how to enter, hide and leave without leaving a clear trail. For the community, the discovery of the tunnels brought both answers and terror. Parents wondered how such places could exist unnoticed beneath their city, and teenagers were forced to confront the reality that someone had been watching, waiting, and operating in plain sight for years. For the police, the tunnels provided the first tangible link between the girls' disappearances and a network operating in the shadows. They were a chilling reminder that the danger was not just in the streets above, but also in the hidden depths beneath Liverpool, a place where light could not reach, and where the missing girls might still leave traces of their ordeal, waiting for someone to find them. As evidence from the tunnels emerged, investigators began to understand that they were not dealing with random criminals, but with an organized group operating with chilling precision. The CCTV footage, combined with items discovered in the abandoned railway tunnels, led the police to a terrifying conclusion. These were not isolated incidents. The missing girls had all been targeted by a coordinated network that knew how to move through Liverpool undetected. The group was later identified by law enforcement as the Shadow Gang, a loose but calculated criminal network that preyed specifically on teenage girls. The Shadow Gang was not known in the traditional sense. They did not advertise their presence, did not operate in plain sight, and had no public history of arrests for violent crimes. Instead, they thrived on invisibility. Members were young men who had learned to manipulate the city, using hidden routes, abandoned properties, and the labyrinthine tunnels to evade detection. They were familiar with police patrol schedules, camera blind spots, and neighborhood routines, which allowed them to operate for years without leaving an obvious trace. Investigators were shocked at the level of planning involved. This was not impulsive crime. It was carefully orchestrated. The gang's methods were systematic and deeply unsettling. Victims were carefully observed, their habits and schedules studied for weeks before any action was taken. The attackers knew when the girls were alone, which streets they traveled, and which friends could provide potential escape or interference. Surveillance footage and witness reports showed how the members avoided contact with the public, maintaining anonymity while keeping their targets within sight. Each movement was deliberate, each plan rehearsed. They were predators who understood the city like a map, knowing how to strike and vanish without leaving any visible clue. What added to the terror was the gang's use of communication and control. They rarely spoke directly to each other in public, and instead relied on coded signals, drop points, and pre-arranged routines to coordinate their actions. Investigators later discovered that even within the gang, individual members rarely knew the full plan. They followed instructions, maintaining layers of secrecy that made it almost impossible for outsiders to penetrate the network. This secrecy was part of their power. The Shadow Gang operated as a shadow within the city, appearing in fragments of footage or fleeting sightings, yet never fully revealing themselves. The discovery of the gang's identity sent shockwaves through Liverpool. Parents and teenagers were horrified to learn that the threat had been present for years, preying on unsuspecting victims in public spaces. Schools issued warnings, community watch programs intensified, and local authorities began an urgent review of safety measures. But fear lingered. The city had been infiltrated by a group that understood its hidden corners better than those meant to protect it. The Shadow Gang had turned everyday streets, parks, and public transport into hunting grounds, exploiting vulnerabilities with precision. For the police, understanding the gang's structure became critical. They knew that capturing individual members would be difficult, unless they could identify the leader, the person who orchestrated the operations and maintained control over the network. Investigators began searching for patterns in the disappearances, hoping to uncover clues that might lead to the mastermind. Every recovered item, Every CCTV frame and every tunnel discovered brought them closer to unmasking the Shadow Gang. Yet, even as they pieced together the evidence, a sense of urgency and dread remained. The longer the gang operated unchecked, the more victims could vanish into the shadows, leaving Liverpool to wrestle with a fear it could hardly see, but could deeply feel. Everything changed when a 16-year-old girl escaped from the grip of the Shadow Gang, bringing the first direct account of the horrors that had haunted Liverpool's streets for years. She had been missing for 3 months, her absence adding to the growing list of unsolved cases, and her sudden reappearance shocked the city. Weak, frightened, and physically exhausted, she carried stories that revealed the depths of the gang's cruelty and sophistication. Her survival became a turning point for investigators, who now had the knowledge they had been desperately searching for. Her account painted a chilling picture. The gang did not abduct victims at random. Each target was carefully chosen, often girls who seemed unaware of the dangers lurking around them. They observed routines for days or even weeks, learning every detail about school routes, part-time jobs, and social patterns. The gang had a methodical approach, ensuring that each member knew only their specific task, so no single person could expose the entire network if caught. The survivor described how members communicated silently, through signals and codes, and how even the leader, known only as the architect, never appeared directly. Instructions came through hidden messages, dead drop points, and cryptic signs left in plain sight, guiding the gang's movements across the city without revealing their identities. The survivor's escape was as calculated as her captivity. She had observed the gang's routines, their use of locks, hidden cameras, and surveillance equipment, and found a small window to flee. Once free, she immediately went to authorities, bringing with her not only her story but tangible evidence of the gang's operations. Her belongings, partially destroyed to remove traces, still held clues: scraps of clothing, a torn notebook with coded entries, and a phone with fragments of messages she had managed to hide from the gang. Each item became a critical piece of the puzzle for investigators, revealing patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. Through her testimony, the police began mapping the gang's movements in unprecedented detail. The survivor described secret rooms within abandoned buildings, hidden compartments and tunnels, and the precise way the gang avoided cameras and patrols. She explained how the Shadow Gang had created a network of fear, carefully isolating victims from the outside world, and ensuring that escape seemed impossible. Even more disturbing, she revealed the psychological manipulation used to keep victims compliant, creating an environment where hope seemed faint and every attempt at resistance could be met with severe consequences. Her courage and clarity provided the first real insight into the mind of the architect. He was meticulous, intelligent, elusive, designing operations so that the gang could act almost invisibly, yet efficiently. His ability to orchestrate abductions without being seen was terrifying. The survivors' evidence became the foundation for law enforcement's next steps, giving them the first real chance to dismantle the gang. Liverpool, a city already gripped by fear, now faced a mix of hope and terror. The survivor's story was proof that escape was possible, that the gang could be but it also confirmed what everyone had feared all along. The Shadow Gang had operated in the city for years, hiding in plain sight, and the architect's plans were far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The investigation had reached a pivotal moment, one that would define the next phase of the pursuit, bringing the city closer to confronting the shadows that had haunted it for far too long. Following the survivor's testimony, the police intensified their investigation, determined to map out the Shadow Gang's operations and find evidence that could lead to arrests. Every lead was scrutinized, and officers worked around the clock to trace the gang's movements through the city. What initially seemed like random activity began to reveal a sinister pattern: unusual financial transactions, hidden properties, and abandoned buildings emerged as central elements of the gang's operation. Each case added weight to the terrifying realization that the Shadow Gang was more organized than anyone had imagined. One breakthrough came when officers noticed a series of cash payments for utility bills at abandoned houses on the outskirts of Liverpool. The payments were irregular, always just enough to keep services running, and made using false identities that could not be traced to any known individuals. Upon entering one of the properties, investigators discovered evidence that suggested recent use: discarded clothing, makeshift bedding, and items belonging to girls who had vanished in the past months. Among the scattered possessions were shoes, backpacks, and notebooks with faint markings, hinting at the meticulous planning that had gone into every abduction. The investigation revealed that the gang had mapped the city with extraordinary precision. Bus stops, shopping centers, and quiet street were marked and monitored, allowing members to track potential victims without drawing attention. The walls of abandoned properties were sometimes covered with notes, maps, and markings that acted as guides for the gang. It became clear that the Shadow Gang had developed an entire infrastructure to support their crimes, turning ordinary spaces into tools for control and concealment. For the police, each new piece of evidence was a mix of relief and horror. Relief, because it provided actionable leads, and horror because it exposed the full scale of the gang's operations. Investigators realized that the group's reach extended further than they had anticipated, involving multiple locations across the city and a network of members who operated in strict secrecy. The gang had created a system that allowed them to act efficiently while minimizing the risk of exposure, and the survivors' stories confirmed how carefully each abduction had been executed. Community fear grew as the investigation progressed. Parents were warned to be vigilant, and schools reinforced safety measures. Local media reported on the progress cautiously, trying to balance public awareness with the need to protect the ongoing investigation. Yet, even as law enforcement pieced together the gang's activities, the knowledge of how organized and prepared they were only deepened the sense of unease. The Shadow Gang had been operating undetected for years, exploiting weaknesses in the city's infrastructure, and the possibility that more victims were still in danger was ever present. The discovery of these hidden operations marked a turning point. Police now had concrete evidence that could be used to link the gang members and, crucially, trace them to their leader, the architect. By following financial records, monitoring properties, and analyzing the survivor's account in detail, investigators began to form a map of the gang's hierarchy and movements. Every abandoned property, every coded mark, and every unusual transaction provided insight into how far-reaching and deliberate the gang's operations had been. As Liverpool waited anxiously, the investigation intensified. The police knew that they were on the verge of uncovering the identities of those responsible, but the operation was delicate. Any misstep could allow the Shadow Gang to vanish again into the city's shadows, leaving more victims in their wake. The tension was palpable, and for the first time hope and fear existed side by side. Hope that justice was close, and fear that the city's darkest secrets had yet to be fully revealed. After weeks of meticulous surveillance tracing financial records and analyzing witness reports, the police finally closed in on a critical lead. A suspicious vehicle had been repeatedly spotted near abandoned properties linked to the Shadow Gang's operations. Surveillance cameras tracked the car across different districts, following patterns that matched the timing of recent disappearances. The vehicle became the key to unraveling the gang's network, and ultimately, finding the elusive leader known only as the architect. The decision was made to stage a coordinated raid. Officers prepared with precision, aware that any misstep could alert the gang and allow them to vanish into the city's labyrinth of streets and tunnels. Early one morning, before dawn broke, a team approached a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of Liverpool, a property that had been paid for with false identities and had long been suspected as a hub for the gang. The surrounding area was quiet, almost unnaturally so, the only sounds the distant calls of birds and the crunch of boots on gravel. Inside, the scene was chaotic yet revealing. Gang members were attempting to destroy evidence, burning documents, smashing phones, and shoving belongings into bags in a desperate effort to hide their crimes. But the police were prepared. Officers moved swiftly, securing the building and preventing any escape. What they found inside was more chilling than anyone had imagined. In a locked room, walls were covered with photographs of missing girls, some recent and some from cases that had long gone cold. The room had been carefully arranged, with notes, maps, and coded schedules, documenting the gang's operations and victims with methodical precision. Among the recovered items was a laptop containing encrypted messages, files and plans that revealed the identity of the architect. Contrary to expectations, he was not a man with a criminal record or a visible history of violence. Instead, he was an event planner, seemingly ordinary and well integrated into society. His public persona was one of professionalism and normality, which had allowed him to orchestrate abductions for years under the radar. The files detailed how he had instructed gang members through codes, signals, and hidden messages, never appearing directly but maintaining strict control over the network. The raid confirmed the terrifying scale of the Shadow Gang's operations. The gang had been operating across Liverpool for years, selecting victims with care, studying routines, and exploiting weaknesses in public spaces. Their infrastructure included multiple safe houses, secret compartments in tunnels, and a system of coded communication that allowed them to coordinate without leaving direct evidence. Every recovered item, from notebooks to maps to digital files, told a story of premeditation, cruelty, and planning that sent shockwaves through investigators. For the city, the raid was both relief and horror. Relief, because key members of the gang had been captured and evidence secured. Horror, because the extent of the crimes revealed how long the gang had operated undetected. For the families of missing girls, the images from the farmhouse were devastating, confirming fears of what their children may have endured. Yet the discovery also offered hope that justice could finally be served. As police secured the site and transported evidence, the investigation turned to the architect. Understanding his methods, motives, connections became the next critical step. The raid had provided the first tangible link to the mastermind, but the city would soon discover that the Shadow Gang's reach might still extend beyond what anyone had imagined, leaving Liverpool on edge, and the story far from over. Even after the raid and the arrest of several Shadow Gang members, Liverpool remained haunted by uncertainty. The investigation had uncovered a network of horrifying crimes, but the fate of the two teenage girls who had first vanished, the girls whose disappearances had set the entire case in motion, remained unknown. Families were left clinging to hope while facing the unbearable fear that their children might never return. The city was quiet in some streets but tense in others, a lingering unease that no amount of arrests could erase. The captured gang members revealed fragments of information, but gaps remained. Many had only participated in limited tasks, leaving the bigger picture incomplete. Even under questioning, some refused to cooperate, maintaining the culture of silence that had allowed the Shadow Gang to operate for years. The architect's meticulous planning had ensured that no single member knew all the operations, a strategy that continued to protect parts of the network even after arrests. Investigators realized that while significant progress had been made, the shadows still concealed unknown elements, and the danger might not be entirely over. Despite this, the raid had changed the trajectory of the case. Evidence recovered from abandoned properties, tunnels, and hidden rooms allowed authorities to identify several victims who had gone missing over the past few years. Some were found alive, traumatized but safe, their recovery bringing relief and a glimpse of closure to families who had long feared the worst. Others were confirmed to have perished, their absence leaving an indelible mark on the city. The painstaking work of cataloging evidence, verifying identities, and connecting each case became a race against time to prevent further tragedies. The two original girls, however, remained missing. Police continued to follow leads, re-examining every piece of recovered evidence and interviewing anyone who might have had indirect contact with the gang. Local residents reported sightings of suspicious individuals, abandoned vehicles, or unusual activity near derelict sites. Each report was investigated carefully, but months passed with no definitive breakthrough. The uncertainty weighed heavily on the city, highlighting the cruel reality that some answers might never come. Liverpool had learned a hard lesson about the hidden dangers that could exist in plain sight. The Shadow Gang had exploited ordinary spaces, streets, parks, bus stops, and shopping centers to commit crimes that went undetected for years. The psychological impact on the community was profound. Parents became hyper-vigilant, Teenagers learned to distrust even familiar surroundings, and the city implemented stricter safety measures and community watch programs. Fear had become part of daily life, a reminder of how easily predators could exploit the gaps in society. Even as arrests were made and evidence compiled, a haunting truth remained. Some members of the Shadow Gang may have escaped, and some operations may still lie hidden in the tunnels, abandoned properties, and dark corners of Liverpool. The city had survived, but it was forever changed. Families continued to hope for the safe return of missing loved ones, while investigators remained vigilant, determined not to let the darkness win. The story of the Shadow Gang became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil can operate unnoticed for years, that vigilance, courage, and persistence are essential in uncovering it. The city moved forward, but the shadows lingered, carrying the memory of the victims and the enduring question, who else remained hidden, waiting in silence?